felt like doing another collection showcase video, this time for Super Famicom games. And I recently organized all my Super Famicom games so that I actually know where they all are. If you saw my Famicom collection video, they were kind of all over the place, but this time, like this box is all square, and I've got a few more boxes with games that are actually organized together. And I'm not gonna show them all at once. It might take, I'll do them on different days, because I want to spend time talking about them in reasonable depth. So a lot of Square's Super Famicom games are pretty well known, but I'm going to start with one that a lot of people might not be as familiar with. This is Hanjuku Hero Sakayo Hanjuku Nare. And I don't think any of the Hanjuku Hero games have been translated, but this is a real-time strategy game, and it's a sequel to Hanjuku Hero on the Famicom, which expands on that game in a lot of ways, mostly in the story. This game has a lot more focus on story, and what's really unique about it is that all the story events are told, they're presented as a stage play. So there's a theater with an audience and curtains and actors, and it's all very self-aware that it's a stage play. For example, in one of the first chapters, I remember this villain character demands that the lighting crew increase the lighting whenever she's on stage. And sometimes you'll see backstage crew members who are dressed all in black. They'll quickly run on stage and take something off or bring something on. And it's got this very silly, it doesn't take itself very seriously. And I really, really enjoyed the story of the game. But the gameplay is, it's really poorly balanced. Despite being a real-time strategy game, it has a lot more focus on fighting with egged monsters, and that was present in the first game on the Famicom as well. But in this game, they made it a lot more of a focus. Enemies can summon egg monsters as well, and you get in turn-based battles with them, and they're just not very well balanced. And it gets kind of repetitive and boring after a while. But it is very much worth playing for the story, and I hope that somebody translates it someday so that more people can check this out, because it's very, very unique. Oh, and this game was directed by Takashi Tokita, who's probably best known for being the lead designer on Final Fantasy IV and Live Alive. But before becoming a game designer, he used to work as a theater actor, and so this feels very much like something that came from the bottom of his heart from his love of theater, and it's pretty cool. Front Mission and Gun Hazard. So, Front Mission is Square's main tactical RPG series, and you control mech units, and you can customize them with different parts, like guns and fists and shields and whatnot. So you spend a lot of time upgrading your units with new parts. But the first Front Mission game is very easy, and a lot of missions you can cheese just by shooting missiles from afar. So I'm not really a big fan of this game. It's alright, but the the later Front Mission games I like more. Gun Hazard is an unusual entry in the series because it's a side-scrolling action game. It still has the mech customization stuff, but it's definitely not a tactical RPG. And I haven't played it in full yet, so I can't talk about it too much, but I've heard that it's very, very good. It's got some nice Amano artwork, as you can see. Bahamut Lagoon is another tactical RPG, which I haven't played. I've heard a lot of mixed opinions on this one, so I haven't been very motivated to actually play it yet, but I do want to give it a chance at some point. Super Mario RPG, probably one of Square's more popular Super Famicom games. It's alright, but I've always liked Paper Mario more. I like the badge system in Paper Mario, and some of the story in Paper Mario I like more. But a lot of the developers from Super Mario RPG left Square after this game, and they formed Lovedelic, which made games like, what did they make? Lack of Love on the Dreamcast, and Moon Remix RPG, and I think Tulip. I'm not sure if that was when they were still Lovedelic, but one of the devs made Tulip. All of which are games that have pretty big cult followings nowadays. So it's kind of interesting that it traces back to this game. Chrono Trigger. I think pretty much everyone knows Chrono Trigger. Saga games. The Romancing Saga trilogy, is my favorite of Square's games on the Super Famicom. And Romancing Saga 2 in particular is my favorite Super Famicom game. And these games were when the Saga series first started experimenting with non-linear structures. For example, in the first Romancing Saga game, there aren't any quests that you are forced to do. It's all up to you what you want to do. And it uses a system where the game keeps track of the total number of battles that you fought internally. And based on that battle count, events in the world like quests will become available, or will pass, or events will proceed one step at a time. For example, in the frontier area, which is an area that's just being explored by some developers from Gujarat, there's a sleeping jewel beast, and eventually the beast wakes up after a certain number of battles. Then it'll proceed from one town to the next and start destroying those towns one step at a time based on the battle count. Unless you interrupt it and fight it. So it's really interesting how it's got this very believable world that feels alive, and it's as though time passes as you're playing the game and doing quests and whatnot. And despite not having any quests that you're forced to do, it has a very, very intriguing world with a lot of interesting culture and political conflicts going on, and it's something that I found myself getting very, very absorbed in by playing it, and sort of seeing that culture firsthand, which is something that Kohazu does really, really well. He doesn't really hold the player's hand through a story, but he does make it very easy to get absorbed in the worlds that he makes. Romancing Saga 2 is interesting because it takes place over hundreds of years, or potentially, more than 1,000 years. And you play as a lineage of emperors. And as you go around the world, you can add different regions to your empire, and that will unlock more classes that you can recruit into your party. And with each new emperor, you're constantly reforming your party and figuring out how to adapt to more situations with your party. This was the first game that Kyoji Koizumi worked on as the battle director, and it was a pretty big leap in terms of battle mechanics over the previous Saga games. And Koizumi remained as the battle director in the Saga series all the way through Romancing Saga Minstrel Song. And after that, he kind of went off on his own, and more recently he made, what were they called? Legend of Legacy and Alliance Alive on the 3DS. So a lot of Saga fans played those games and enjoyed those ones. I'd love to talk about... I could talk about all the Saga games for hours, but it's going to take way too long, so I should probably move on. But yeah, these games are really, really, really good. If you haven't played any of these, you should check them out. There's remasters of 2 and 3 that were released in the last few years, which you can get on consoles and PC and whatnot. And yeah, those are in English too. They actually localized them, because originally these games were not localized. Let's see. Final Fantasy 4. Final Fantasy 5. Final Fantasy 6. Final Fantasy United States of America, The Patriot's Quest. Yeah, I mean, they're the Final Fantasy games. Of these, 5 is my favorite. I like all the Super Famicom Final Fantasy games, although, Mystic Quest is not very good. I think even as a beginner RPG, it's kind of misses the mark. But yeah, they're cool, and I've played 5 a number of times. I do the 4-job Fiesta most years, and that's kind of a cool way to revisit the game and experiment with different class combinations, because there's, I think, like 20 different jobs in the game, and it's balanced really well in terms of making each class viable and giving them their own competitive edge. Yeah. Seiken Densetsu 2 and 3, or Secret of Mana and Trials of Mana, now that they actually localized 3 finally. To be honest, I don't really like the gameplay of either of these games very much. They're action RPGs, and they're games that are not very good either as action games or as RPGs. Like, the action isn't very good, and the RPG mechanics are very simple. But what I do really love about these games is that they have beautiful, beautiful art direction and some of the best music on the Super Famicom. And I think Seiken Densetsu 3 in particular is the best looking Super Famicom game, hands down. So even though I think the gameplay just isn't that interesting, I actually really love running around and fighting stuff in these games, especially in 3, because it's just so relaxing listening to the soundtrack and you know, running around these beautiful worlds. So yeah, they're pretty cool. Alright. Alive. I think I mentioned before, this is another Takashi Tokita game. And in this game, there's several different scenarios that you can play in any order. And they've all got a unique kind of theme to them. Like there's a cowboy chapter, and a ninja chapter, and a robot chapter, and so on. And they've all kind of got their own gimmicks to them. Like in the ninja chapter, it's mainly focused on stealth and sneaking around through this big, what do you call it? Well, sneaking around a big area, whatever. Or like in the cowboy chapter, you're setting up traps to catch some outlaw and his fiends and whatnot. There's even a chapter that's set up like a fighting game where you're just fighting back-to-back battles. So some people really like this game for the gimmicks, and I understand that, but I don't like the battle mechanics at all. I feel like it's really broken in terms of how the turn order works. Like the game, okay, I could spend a lot of time talking about the mechanics, but basically I think it's kind of a mess in terms of game mechanics. And this game had the same like battle director as Honjoku Hero on the Super Famicom, and I think that guy just doesn't know what he's doing in terms of how to balance games, but that's just my opinion. Actually, that guy ended up making Mother 3, believe it or not. I don't remember his name, but I don't really like the systems that he makes, to be perfectly honest. And lastly, Square's last Super Famicom game, unless you count Treasure Hunter G, but that wasn't actually developed by them. Rudra no Hiho. This is a really interesting game because of the magic system. In this game, you can write in your own spells using 6 katakana characters, and there will be different effects for the spell depending on what parts you enter in the name. So like there will be a core part that'll give it a basic function. For example, a water spell has the core aku, and then you can add a prefix in front of that to alter the effects of the spell, like making it more powerful, or adding status effects, or making it multi-target, and things like that. And there's prefixes, there's suffixes, there's even things that you can put in between the 2 core characters, which usually adds a status effect. And throughout the game, you're just constantly learning about new spell parts and experimenting with them in your spell book. And enemies will use the same magic system. So if you see an enemy use a spell, you can just write that down and use that spell yourself if you enter it in your spell book. And you'll also learn about spell parts from NPCs and whatnot. So, really cool system. Interestingly, this game was developed by the same team that did Final Fantasy Mystic Quest and Saga 3 on the Game Boy. Both games which I don't particularly like very much, but this was their first original game, and I think they did something really interesting with it. Although the battle system itself has some flaws, I think it's very focused on elements and generally most bosses, they'll spam one elemental attack, and they're weak to a certain element, and as long as you've got a strong spell of the element that they're weak to, and gear that's resistant to the element that they spam, then you can kind of breeze through the game really easily. So, you know, it would have been nice to see something more complex in the battles, but really cool magic system. And it's got an interesting way of doing the story where you can play from 3 different scenarios in any order you want, and you can even swap between them. And they take place over the same, I think, like 15 or 16-day period. And so playing through the different scenarios, you'll see events from different perspectives. So like what happens in one scenario, you'll see the effects somewhere else based on where that character is at that time. So that's really, really cool. And then after you finish all 3 scenarios, you get like a 4th final one where the main protagonists come together and you fight the final boss. So yeah, really cool game, and the sprite animation is amazing. The first time I saw this, I couldn't believe this was on the Super Famicom because all the sprites are animated so well, including like big bosses, and there's tons of animation frames for the playable characters. It looks so good. And that's all the Square games that I have. I'm missing Final Fantasy IV Easy Type and Treasure Hunter G and Alcahest, which are published by Square, although they're not developed by Square. But that's like almost all the games that they made. They were quite prolific back then. And yeah, I'll probably do another one of these videos at some point. Take care.